Welcome to our deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at the history and the lasting impact of the Armenian Genocide.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of different sources for you guys today.
Mm-hmm.
Everything from historical accounts and personal stories,
Yeah.
legal documents, political analyses.
It's going to be a lot.
It's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
But the goal here is to really go beyond, just kind of the headlines.
Yeah, not just the surface.
And give you a deeper, more nuanced understanding of this complex event.
Absolutely. And one of the things that's so fascinating about these sources is that they don't just recount the events.
Right.
They really kind of grapple with the meaning of it, the consequences of it, and the ways we remember or try to forget atrocities like this.
Yeah. And I think that that's what makes this deep dive so important. To really grasp the weight of what happened, I think we need to start by understanding Armenia's history.
Yeah.
And it's a history that, unfortunately, kind of lays the groundwork for this tragedy.
You're absolutely right. Armenia has one of the oldest cultures in the world.
Wow.
Dating back to the 3rd millennium BC.
Wow.
Just imagine that. A civilization thriving while the pyramids are being built.
Gosh.
And its location, right? At this crossroads between continents, a bridge between East and West.
Yeah.
That has shaped its destiny. And in some ways, it's been beautiful, but also,
Right.
in many ways, quite tragic.
So that explains why Armenia has experienced so many invasions and struggles for autonomy throughout its history then.
Precisely. Assyrians, Greeks, Romans, Byzantines, Arabs, Mongols, Persians, Turks, Ottomans, Russians, you name it.
Oh, my goodness.
They've all left their mark on Armenia.
Wow.
And sadly, that mark has often been one of violence and oppression.
Yeah. It's almost hard to fathom that level of upheaval over centuries.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, even with that kind of turbulent history,
Yeah.
There's this incredible resilience that's kind of woven into Armenian culture. One of the sources we have actually quotes William Saroyan,
Okay.
the American writer of Armenian descent.
Yes.
He said, "Go ahead, destroy Armenia, see if they will not last, sing, and pray again."
That quote, I think, really gets at the heart of the Armenian spirit, the spirit of survival, this absolute refusal to be erased.
Yeah.
And this is where it gets, I think, even more poignant. Saroyan's words also foreshadow the attempts to do exactly that.
Right.
Destroy, silence, erase Armenian identity.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is where the story takes a dark turn.
Yeah.
As we kind of move into the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
Right.
The Ottoman Empire, the rise of Turkish nationalism.
Hmm.
Can you explain how these factors kind of set the stage for the Armenian Genocide?
The Ottoman Empire, once this vast and mighty power, was crumbling.
Right.
And as it weakened, a new ideology took hold, Turkish nationalism.
Right.
But this wasn't just about pride in one's heritage.
Right.
It was about creating a homogenous society, a Turkey for the Turks. And this vision had very dangerous implications for minorities within the empire.
So the Armenians, being a Christian minority in this increasingly nationalistic empire, became a target.
Tragically, yes. They were viewed as an obstacle to this idea of a purely Turkish state, an internal foe that needed to be dealt with.
Yeah.
And we see this really clearly in the rhetoric of the Young Turks, a political movement that came to power in 1908.
Okay.
Their statements are chilling.
Yeah. One of the sources quotes a prominent young Turk leader, Dr. Pihedin Shakir, as saying, "Total annihilation of the Armenians has been decided. And for this reason, we have no option but to resort to excessively sanguinary measures. To start with, exterminate outstanding Armenians."
Wow.
It's horrifying to read such blatant pronouncements of violence and hatred.
Absolutely. This wasn't simply violence erupting spontaneously.
Right.
These quotes and others like them reveal a calculated, premeditated plan to eliminate the Armenian people.
Right.
It was a deliberate policy.
Right.
And I think understanding that intentionality is crucial when we talk about the Armenian Genocide.
So we've talked about these rising tensions.
Right.
But wasn't there an international agreement meant to protect minorities within the Ottoman Empire?
Yeah.
What happened with the Berlin Treaty?
The Berlin Treaty, signed in 1878, was a major international agreement.
Right.
And it did include provisions for Armenian rights and reforms.
Right.
At the time, it offered hope for a more tolerant and inclusive Ottoman society.
But tragically, those promises were broken.
They were.
The Ottoman government never intended to implement.
Yeah.
those reforms in any meaningful way.
Sadly, that's right.
And the European powers, kind of focused on their own rivalries and ambitions, didn't hold the Ottoman Empire accountable for its actions, or in this case, inaction.
Yeah, it was a failure of international pressure.
Right.
And it left the Armenian people incredibly vulnerable.
Facing a government that increasingly saw them as a threat.
Yeah.
All amidst this rising tide of Turkish nationalism.
Right.
It's a grim and unsettling picture.
It is. And unfortunately, this sets the stage for the systematic horror of the Armenian genocide itself, which we'll delve into more deeply next.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Armenian genocide, it really stands as this chilling example of how a state can meticulously orchestrate the destruction of a people.
Yeah. It wasn't just some, a spontaneous eruption of violence.
Right.
This was planned. This was annihilation.
It was.
So as we move into talking about the genocide itself, I have to admit, it's hard to even know where to begin. How did this systematic campaign of horror actually unfold?
Well, it started, I think, with a very calculated act of betrayal.
Okay.
Armenian soldiers serving in the Ottoman army were disarmed.
Wow.
These men who had sworn allegiance to the empire were stripped of their weapons.
Right.
And either murdered outright or forced into labor battalions, where they faced just brutal conditions and often met their deaths.
So several sources mentioned the arrest and murder of Armenian intellectuals and community leaders.
Right.
What was the purpose behind targeting these individuals specifically?
Well, I think it was on April 24, 1915. Hundreds of Armenian intellectuals, artists, writers, professionals in Constantinople, they were rounded up.
Wow.
Deported to the interior and killed. This was a deliberate attempt to really decapitate Armenian society.
Okay.
To silence its voice, eliminate its leadership, and crush its spirit.
It's chilling to think about that date, April 24th.
Yeah.
Kind of marking the beginning of the genocide. And of course, it's now the day when Armenians around the world commemorate the victims.
Right. It's a day of mourning, of remembrance, a powerful call for justice. But tragically, the horrors didn't end there.
Right.
What followed these targeted killings were mass deportations.
Right.
Hundreds of thousands of Armenians were forcibly expelled from their homes. Families were torn apart, communities shattered.
Our sources describe these deportations as death marches.
Yeah.
With Armenians driven from their villages, often with nothing but the clothes on their backs.
Right, absolutely. Right. These weren't mere relocations. These marches were brutal, designed to inflict maximum suffering and death. Yeah. Men, women, children, the elderly, all forced to walk.
Gosh.
For hundreds of miles, often in scorching heat, without food, without water.
Right.
Many died from exhaustion, starvation, or disease along the way. Those who couldn't keep up, those who faltered, they were often shot or beaten to death.
We came across quite a few descriptions of Deir ez-Zor in our research, and one account even refers to it as like the Armenian Auschwitz.
Oh, wow.
What made this camp so horrific?
These Deir ez-Zor, located in the Syrian desert, it became this desolate graveyard for hundreds of thousands of Armenians. The systematic brutality there was staggering. Starvation, dehydration, exposure to the elements, rampant disease, torture, mass executions. I mean, all meticulously orchestrated to exterminate the Armenian people.
It's almost unbearable to read the details described in these sources about the methods used. Starvation, physical abuse, mass shootings, drownings in the Black Sea.
Yeah.
The cruelty is just, it's beyond comprehension.
I think it is essential to acknowledge the full scope of the horror, even though it's incredibly painful to confront.
Yeah.
And I think it's also important to remember that the Armenians weren't the only victims of this period. Other ethnic and religious groups in the crumbling Ottoman Empire, such as the Assyrians and the Pontian Greeks, also suffered persecution and massacres.
Yeah, that's a crucial point that one of the historical analyses really emphasized.
Yeah.
Connecting the Armenian genocide to this broader pattern of ethnic cleansing and violence against minorities within the Ottoman Empire.
Exactly. I think it's a chilling reminder that genocide rarely occurs in isolation.
Right.
It often arises in these contexts of political instability, nationalist fervor, and, the scapegoating of vulnerable groups.
And that kind of brings us to another layer of this tragedy.
Yeah.
The fact that the Armenian genocide wasn't just this horrific event of the past.
Right.
Its legacy, particularly the issue of denial, continues to this day.
You're right. Modern-day Turkey, the successor state to the Ottoman Empire, continues to deny that a genocide took place.
Wow.
Their official narrative downplays the events, often framing them as a necessary response to Armenian rebellion or simply a tragic consequence of wartime chaos.
Several sources describe this as negationism, a deliberate and systematic attempt to rewrite history and erase the memory of the genocide.
Right.
They also point to Turkish laws, like Section 301, which criminalize speaking about the genocide. Like, those laws have this chilling effect on free speech.
They do.
And they make open and honest discussions about the past.
Yeah.
Incredibly difficult. Imagine being a survivor or a descendant of a victim.
Right.
And being told that your suffering, the suffering of your family, your people, was fabricated or exaggerated.
Right.
The pain of that denial just adds another layer.
Absolutely.
Of trauma.
It does.
To an already horrific experience.
Yeah, it really does.
We also came across some information about controversy surrounding the State Department's use of the word ambiguous.
Okay.
To describe the historical record.
Right.
Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think that was a really pivotal moment because it highlighted the power of language.
Right.
And the deep sensitivities surrounding this issue. Armenian American organizations, along with many scholars and human rights advocates, they immediately challenged that language.
Yeah.
They argued that using the word ambiguous minimized the genocide.
Right.
Essentially playing into the hands of those who deny it.
And ultimately, the State Department retracted that language.
They did, which is a testament, I think, to the persistent efforts of those who seek truth and justice for the Armenian people.
Right.
But it also underscores how fraught this issue remains, even in diplomatic circles.
So while we see some progress in acknowledging the truth, the struggle for full international recognition of the Armenian genocide has been a long and difficult road.
It has. While the genocide is widely acknowledged by historians and many countries, Turkey's persistent denial has created significant political obstacles to achieving universal recognition.
We found references to some key milestones in this struggle, like the People's Tribunal at the Sorbonne in 1984, the UN Subcommission's acknowledgement in 1985, the European Parliament's declaration in 1987, and Israel's official condemnation in 1994.
These milestones represent, I think, small but significant victories. They demonstrate a growing international consensus about the nature of the Armenian genocide and the importance of acknowledging historical truth. However, the fact that we're still talking about this in 2024, over a century after the events, shows just how challenging it is to achieve full justice and accountability.
Why has international recognition been so slow and politically charged?
Frankly, I think it often comes down to political expediency. Governments frequently prioritize their relationships with Turkey, a strategically important country, over, what they may perceive as a historical debate.
So in this case, it seems like political pragmatism outweighs the pursuit of historical accuracy.
Sadly, I think that's often the case. Turkey has also engaged in extensive lobbying efforts to prevent recognition, using its political and economic influence to sway other countries. It's a reminder that the pursuit of justice can be incredibly complex, especially when powerful interests are at play.
Despite these obstacles, the fight for justice and memory continues. And that kind of brings us to another crucial dimension of our deep dive: the importance of remembrance.
Absolutely. Remembrance isn't just about honoring the past. It's about learning from it, preventing future atrocities, and upholding the dignity of the victims.
Our sources highlight various ways the Armenian genocide is commemorated around the world, particularly the Day of Remembrance on April 24th. What does that day represent, not just for Armenians, but for all of us?
It's a day for Armenians and people of conscience worldwide to come together, reflect, and reaffirm their commitment to never forgetting the victims. And to actively fighting against all forms of genocide and intolerance. It's a reminder that these acts of barbarity, they don't just happen in a vacuum. They happen when hatred and prejudice are allowed to fester, when those in power choose division and violence over unity and understanding.
This feels like a powerful moment to kind of bring it back to you, the listener. What does remembrance mean to you? How can we as individuals ensure that such atrocities are never forgotten and never repeated?
Those are the questions I think we all need to grapple with. Remembering the Armenian genocide isn't just about acknowledging a historical event. It's about confronting the roots of hatred, prejudice, and violence that can lead to such horrific acts. And I think it's about understanding that silence is complicity.
It feels like we're kind of shifting now.
Yeah.
From focusing on like what happened to like why it matters.
Yeah.
Even today, more than a century later.
That's exactly the point. I mean, understanding past genocides.
Yeah.
Like the Armenian genocide. It isn't just an intellectual exercise. It's not just a history lesson.
All right.
It's a moral imperative.
Yeah.
And it really, I think, shapes how we respond to present-day conflicts.
Right.
And human rights abuses that are happening all around the world right now.
One of the sources really challenged me with this question.
Yeah.
How does understanding past genocides inform our response to present-day conflicts and human rights abuses?
Mm-hmm.
It's a heavy question.
It is.
But it feels incredibly relevant.
It's a heavy question, but it's one we can't afford to ignore.
Right.
For me, it's about recognizing those warning signs, those patterns, of hate speech and discrimination that can so easily escalate into violence.
Right.
It's about holding perpetrators accountable.
Yeah.
And preventing impunity, which, so often happens.
Right.
And I think fundamentally it's about standing up for the vulnerable, the marginalized, whoever they may be, wherever they are.
Another source would kind of push this idea even further.
Yeah.
Asking about the connection between historical memory and national identity.
Yeah.
It asked, how can we reconcile these conflicting narratives?
Right.
Especially when those narratives are so deeply entrenched.
That's where things get really complex.
Right.
I think the Armenian genocide is a prime example
of
how historical narratives can be manipulated and weaponized.
Right.
Denial, in a sense, is a way to control the narrative, to maintain a particular version of history that serves, certain political or nationalistic interests.
Reading through these sources, I kept thinking about the responsibility that we all have as individuals. And it feels overwhelming at times.
Yeah.
But how can we, as you said, make a difference in raising awareness about genocide and advocating for justice? Where do we even begin?
I think it starts with education, with, seeking out diverse perspectives, challenging the narratives that we're presented with.
Right.
We have to be willing to engage in dialogue, even when it's uncomfortable, and speak out against injustice whenever and wherever we see it.
Yeah.
And I think we can support organizations that are working tirelessly to document and commemorate these atrocities.
Right.
To, keep the memory alive and ensure that the lessons of the past aren't forgotten.
These sources have been a powerful reminder that silence is complicity. And the more we learn about these events, the more we understand how crucial it is to act, to speak out, to refuse to let these horrors just fade into the background of history.
You're absolutely right. The Armenian genocide was a horrific crime against humanity, a devastating loss of life and culture.
Right.
But it also ignited this global movement for recognition, justice, and remembrance.
And that movement continues today.
It does.
Stronger than ever.
Yes.
It demands that we not only remember the past, but also actively work to prevent such tragedies from happening again.
One final thought I'd like to leave you with. Our sources highlighted the importance of these international legal frameworks, like the Genocide Convention.
Right.
But as we've discussed, laws and treaties are only as effective as the will to enforce them.
So the question remains, what will we do with this knowledge?
Right.
How will we use it to create a more just and compassionate world?
Yeah.
How will we honor the memory of the victims of the Armenian genocide and all genocides?
The answer, my friend, lies with each and every one of us. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a somber but essential journey. Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep the memory of the Armenian genocide alive.